position of the Delta Watermaster was created by the Delta Reform Act in 2009, and essentially the Delta Watermaster is something of a referee of water rights with the goal of protecting water quality in the Delta. And so what you see around us is really the eastern gateway to the Delta at the confluence of the Mokelumne and Cosumnes rivers, and we're in the midst of a floodplain here, which is really designed to take pressure off in rains like we saw this winter. If we were here 2 months ago, we would be under about 6 feet of water where we're standing right now. So we wouldn't be able to have this conversation today. So, and that's the point of floodplains. The rivers need places to go, room to roam, and that's what the Cosumnes floodplain gives us. And the Cosumnes is the last unregulated or undammed watershed from the Sierra, and so it's really the last remnant of a real natural watershed system at work here, and so it's nice to be talking to you here today.
Why, I don't know, why is the Cosumnes the last undammed? Just never got around to it?
Never got around to it. I think it's a very flashy river. I think how much water the Cosumnes could hold is always an open question. Where you'd put a dam is an open question. But thanks to that, it is the last undammed river in the Sierra watershed.
Well, I want to know more about the Delta, but first I have to say, you might have the coolest title of any state official, to be honest.
Yeah, it's an interesting title. It's right. It has a lot of history to it. Generally, a watermaster is appointed in places where rivers start to run dry and water rights holders are competing against each other for claims about access to water. And this position is a bit different. It was created in 2009 by the Delta Reform Act, which also set out to achieve two dual objectives. One, to protect water supply for the Central Valley, Southern California, and the Bay Area, and additionally to protect the environmental values of the 5-county Delta region, and just really so the position exists really to balance water rights and protect water quality, which affects the 500,000 people that call the Delta home, as well as Californians that live in the Central Valley and Southern California that rely on water from the state and federal water projects. And so we're at the intersection of all of those interests today.
So before we talk specifically about the Delta and its importance, keeping on the Watermaster subject, what are you hoping to bring to the office? Because you're newly appointed, what are some goals and objectives?
Yeah. So I think if you step back from it and you think about the threats of climate change, so longer droughts and bigger storms like we saw this winter, where we actually experience these arc storm events, and this last winter was a relatively small scale arc event, and so we have to think of that in context. But when you think about those dual forces of having big wet winters like this past one and longer periods of drought like we've just really experienced over the past 20 years, this region, the Delta itself, it's a 5-county area, some 700,000 acres, and 57 reclaimed islands, and some up to 200 islands at last count throughout the Delta, is really uniquely threatened by climate change. In fact, I think I would make the argument that this area is more threatened by climate change than any other place in the United States, because it's dealing with sea level rise coming from the west, and more unpredictable freshwater conditions as a result of changing precipitation from climate change. So again, the big winter rains that we saw this past winter and 20 years of drought interrupted by a couple of rainy years is the new normal that California is more likely to see. And so as a result of that, we really need to dig into this at a much deeper level with more integrated, more transparent science, really sharing more about what individual winter seasons, summer seasons are telling us about the the need to protect ecological values and water quality here in the Delta, and at the same time try to meet the needs for water supply for 75% of Californians that live south of the Delta.
So, talk to me about the Delta itself. What is it? Why is it important? And we can get to conveyance a little later.
Yeah, great. So the Delta region, sometimes called California's first big public works project, because this what we see here is something like what the Delta would look like naturally. But the Delta itself is a network of 57 reclaimed islands, which are built up and diked. We call them islands. They're really more like sinks because the levees are above the river level. And so that's a very unique characteristic here in the Delta. And so you've got 57 reclaimed islands, up to 200 islands, and you've got a wide array of different land use and economic interests at stake here. You have about 75% of the land in the Delta is used for agriculture. Every crop from tomatoes to grapes, triticale and potatoes and corn, rice, and everything in between. And so you've got a wide diversity of crops that are grown in the Delta. And at the same time, it's a really unique ecosystem. In geologic time, it's very young. It's what you see around you is really 10,000 years old, and it's the product of the end of the last glaciation in California, where this area was really created by a lot of deposition from the glaciers melting. And then we've all been through the Carquinez Straits. It has a very narrowing effect and really held sediment behind it. And so that created a very unique system called an inverse delta, because in the Mississippi Delta, that's a traditional delta where the rivers work to just push soil out and create more land. This delta was created by holding soil back and holding water back at the same time and creating a massive wetland complex. So we've lost 95% of that, and that's why I also say it's kind of California's first big public works project dating from the end of the gold rush era. Many of these islands have been here since 1860. The latest reclaimed one was McCormick-Williamson Tract, just a few miles to the west of where we're talking. And the Nature Conservancy worked with the Department of Water Resources to begin to restore that to a natural condition. And so it's more like a marsh environment. And so you have a wide array of land use types, and you've got different economics interests in that, from recreational users in the Western Delta that are out here for kayaking, windsurfing, kite surfing, a lot of bass fishermen in the Delta. You've got agriculture in the Delta. You've got agritourism in the Delta. You've got a lot of people that find this an amazing place to live, and it's a refuge from a lot of people from the Bay Area moving west into Delta communities. And so it's a very unique place with a lot of competing values. And I think the one thing that every one of those stakeholders would agree on is what we really have to watch for the health of the Delta in the future is watching what's our water quality like, what is the salinity of the water like, and how do we keep a freshwater and brackish freshwater ecosystem together, functioning, and allow salmon to pass through, allow help to recover Delta smelt, help to recover longfin smelt, help to recover a myriad of threatened and endangered species through the system. And to give you a sense of the magnitude of the challenge, as recently as the 1980s, you would expect salmon runs of fall run salmon through the Delta in the range of 100,000 fish. This year, the salmon season will be closed, and it's down to probably less than 5,000 returning fish. So we're the ecosystem of the Delta is really challenged, and it's a fragile balance that we've got to maintain here.
So talk to me a little bit about the freshwater, brackish, saltwater environments that we see here. What creates those, and why is too much of any one of those a bad thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So really, so that what you've got here is the delta is the intersection between tidal influence coming in from San Francisco Bay that defines the delta, and it goes as far north as the I Street Bridge in Sacramento, into Stockton and beyond in the southern delta. And so the tidal influence pushes salt water into the delta, and in turn the freshwater values of the delta are fed by the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. And in a big water year like this, you think, oh, everything's great. The reality is a lot of these levees were severely tested. And in the San Joaquin River, the lower San Joaquin, these levees will be tested because of a record snowpack in the southern Sierra up into the month of August for actual flood preparedness strategies along the southern San Joaquin and lower San Joaquin River. So so we're really, it's a careful balancing of the incoming freshwater systems that flush the delta and protect freshwater values that for drinking water, for agriculture, for human use, for wildlife, for fish, and then the mixing zone, the tidal influence that comes in from tidal currents from San Francisco Bay. That's the saltwater influence. And so you've got this convergence of freshwater and saltwater, and the delta is a big mixing zone for that. The challenge in managing the delta is keeping those salinity levels low enough so that freshwater can really be used to balance the system and really provide water for agriculture, provide water for people, provide desirable water to swim in. And promote these kinds of riparian forests around us, and so it's that balance that we're really striving to protect in the delta.
Is that natural balance, since it seems like we have to do a lot of work, is that natural balance out of whack, or is climate change making that potentially disappear or move?
Well, the climate change is a fundamental challenge to this, because in a sense, when we're looking at conditions like we see in drought, where there is very little fresh water coming into the delta, it absolutely affects water quality, and it absolutely affects what kind of water you're putting on crops, what level of water treatment for communities like Rio Vista and Stockton and others that rely on the delta as a source of fresh water supply. And that's something that we have to watch carefully. And so the delta is a very fragile place to maintain a balance. And through regulatory proceedings over the years at the state board, through court actions, through biological opinions to protect salmon and delta smelt, there is a strict flow regime in the delta that the State Water Board is striving to protect. And the index for those water quality standards along in the system is really to watch salinity levels through the system and to try to protect this balance of, okay, we know that in a dry year we're going to see salinity encroaching deeper for more months into the delta. And what does that mean for water rights, both north, south, and in the delta? And so it's a complex balancing act to protect water quality here for multiple uses of water. And I say that from whether you're a farmer and you're concerned about irrigation, whether you live in Lodi or Stockton or Rio Vista or anywhere in the delta. And additionally, if you live in the Bay Area, you're reliant on water quality in the delta, and in the way the state and federal pumps are operated today, your freshwater quality also depends on water quality in the delta. So the delta is managed to protect a freshwater ecosystem that merges with a saltwater intrusion brought in by the tides every day. And in between that, we have the mixing zone, which is really what this 700,000 acre place that we call the Delta really represents. It is a big mixing zone with lots of multiple objectives at stake and challenging dynamics to manage. And The latest of which are really harmful algal blooms as an indicator, and those blooms tend to show up where we have nutrient loading and poor drainage and lack of tidal movement and water circulation, and we've seen more and more of that in the Delta. And so that's clearly an indicator in looking at managing to address harmful algal blooms throughout the Delta as really a benchmark for making sure that we're targeting problems and trying to address those problems by protecting freshwater quality and more flow in the Delta. So those are really key objectives that we have to manage for.
Let me ask you about wasting water. We hear
Yeah.
that a lot. When we release water out of Shasta or Trinity or Folsom, and we always say we're releasing for ecological reasons or to sustain the flow downstream. Is that really wasting water? Because that's that fresh water you were talking about that we need in the Delta, right?
Yeah, I think you're going to find that wasting water is a loaded term that may affect the beholder's interests. So I will say right from the top that the healthiest rivers have a groundwater and surface water connection that keeps those rivers alive all season long. I think that those are values that are supported by everyone that lives in California, whether you're in Northern California or Southern California. And so it's really one of those situations that you have to kind of bear in mind, and what do you mean about wasting water? Because I think that a water year like this one is clearly going to flush the system. Which is really beneficial for fish and wildlife, and likely we'll see salmon recover 2 and 3 years from now at a record pace by having a year like this. And additionally, we've had so much water this year that throughout California that there's literally nowhere to store it south of the Delta. The reservoirs will be substantially full this year. In fact, we're worried about flooding conditions in the San Joaquin River as late as August of this year, which is almost unheard of. I mean, that river runs dry often by June or July. And so so the order of magnitude, to think about experiencing a fear about flooding, we really need to kind of think about this in the big picture, that it's, with these big years, water is going to find water finds its own level, and is one way of saying it. The water is going to be, when it's abundant in the system, you almost can't control it, which is what we saw this year. Where it really tested our levee systems to the brink. You had levees topped in the Cosumnes system just to the south of where we're standing. Where we are in this moment was I would be under 10 feet of water right now, just a month and a half ago. And so so just putting things in perspective, nature needs water, and people need water too. Fortunately, in a year like this, we've been able to refill virtually all of the reservoirs throughout California. What we do have to get more creative about in the long run is figuring out how to better store groundwater and capture it on the ground, let it percolate into the ground, and begin to restore aquifers, which will take decades to do. But we really need to reconcile groundwater and surface water usage and really start to apply science on a much more holistic level in how we're tracking water use throughout California.
Well, tell me about Delta conveyance. And so not necessarily, doesn't have to be tunnel specific, but we do move water from the Delta down towards Southern California. A lot of people are against that as well. Thoughts?
Yeah, so it's again, this is we're at the intersection of California's water interests. This is the source of water for the state and federal water projects, also the Bay Area, and all the communities in the Delta, and all the farms that exist across 700,000 acres in the Delta. So we're at the intersection of that really complicated dynamic. So when you think about conveyance, the reality is, you need to do that in a way that recognizes the challenges of climate change. In a year like this, you could see an ability to move water But again, where do you store it? And this year we're maxed out on storage. So, but in a year like this, you would have water to move across the delta. This is clearly an exception, right? All of us at some level were worried about flood impacts to friends that we heard about or others. And so again, it's a fragile balance that we're managing to protect in the delta. And so in thinking about conveyance, it's really the lens of water quality. Are we protecting water quality values? Are we really watching what salinity levels are throughout the delta? Are we protecting water for all beneficial uses? That is for people, for agriculture, for recreation, and thinking about how we maintain and protect those values. I mean, the single best indicator we have for protecting water quality is to watch salinity levels throughout the delta, and they vary. And they vary by tidal impacts and currents. They vary by local conditions and having a lack of circulation in the delta in certain places. And we need to solve for that. And so it's a really, again, it's a complicated puzzle. And so when you think about conveyance, the fundamental factor that we need to manage to protect is water quality throughout the delta. And so that's really the framework that the state board would be approaching in evaluating any kind of a conveyance proposal presented to it.
Specifically with the Delta Tunnel, what do you think about the state's proposed plan to put a tunnel in to help move water? They say it would help protect against things like earthquakes and climate change as well. Do you have any specific thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the state board, State Water Resources Control Board, is a regulatory entity, and it will evaluate a proposal for a tunnel or any other conveyance or change of a point of diversion that's presented to it. That proposal has not been presented to the state board. The Delta Watermaster and the State Water Resources Control Board have an independent role and really need to weigh those other factors that are in California law in protecting water quality standards for all beneficial uses of water. And those beneficial uses are involve nature, keeping rivers healthy. They involve protecting recreational values, protecting water quality for all users of water, protecting agricultural use of water. So the state board, when presented with a proposal, if they are presented with a proposal for a tunnel or other conveyance, would evaluate a project based on all of those concerns about the multiple uses of water throughout the delta through the lens, really, as we've been talking about, through the lens of water quality. And that's fundamentally the issue that I think unifies both delta interests and frankly has to bring the state into the conversation in a broader sense to really protect these values that are fragile in the delta and that are increasingly fragile at a time of climate change when we're going to experience longer droughts and flashier, bigger storm winters, just like this past one. And so kind of keeping all of those factors in balance is really what the State Water Resources Control Board and the Delta Watermaster have to look at in evaluating a tunnel project or any other conveyance or a change in the point of diversion that could affect delta water quality.
Do you think the delta becomes even more important as we continue to experience climate change, and maybe we can't pull as much water off of the Colorado?
Absolutely. The delta can't be seen as an endless supply source, just as the Colorado can't be seen as an endless supply source. In fact, the Delta Reform Act that created the Delta Water Master position in 2009 established that there would be two goals: protecting delta water quality and the delta as a source of water supply, and protecting the unique ecology and conditions for agriculture and communities that rely on the delta as a place. And so it's really balancing those two factors that is really the cornerstone of state law. Often this is expressed as meeting the dual goals of the delta: protecting the delta as a source of water supply and protecting the delta environment and its ecosystem.
If I'm an everyday Californian, whether I live in the Delta or not, is there anything I can do to help? Protect the Delta or get involved? Like, what can I do as Joe Schmo that lives?
Yeah, That's a great question. I think honestly, what we all need to strive to get to is really one science for one delta. And we need to be much more transparent in putting all of this science together about water quality, about flows, about the health of salmon in the delta and above, and putting that together really in one place that's accessible to the public, and that everyone should be tracking, honestly. I think that the Delta is a very unique place, and as I said, sometimes it's called California's first public works project because it didn't start like this. People really diked and drained areas to create this 200-acre network with 57 very substantial, some larger than 10,000-acre islands throughout the Delta. That is one of the most robust growing regions for agriculture anywhere in California, anywhere in the world, with a broader diversity of crops and environmental values here that it is really something all of us should strive to protect. So I think my message for all Californians is that we need to support better science. We need to support really understanding water quality at a much more localized level. So certainly here throughout the Delta, we need to do that to manage to meet salinity standards that are beneficial for all of us, whether we care about fish, whether we care about windsurfing, whether we care about agriculture and tourism in this region. And it's really, I think it is such a special place because it is this, it is really the intersection of all California water interests in one place. And so the challenge here is how do we manage and protect the fragile environmental values? And I say fragile because we know salmon are in real trouble in this system. And all Californians care about saving salmon. And the way I think we're going to get there is to be much more deliberative about having a very accessible Delta science program that all Californians can really access and understand, okay, what are the water quality conditions? What are the flood threats in the Delta? What are the threats to wildlife? What are we doing right? What do we need to do more of? I think most people in the Delta would agree we need to have more riparian forests like this that help protect freshwater quality also, and frankly are good for our soul to get out and experience, whether it's on the water boating, whether it's walking or biking or birding around the Delta. And it is just such an interesting and challenging place in thinking about how do you manage this to protect these fragile environmental values and yet meet the needs of Californians, and in recognizing that we still need to learn a lot. This is like a learning laboratory, but it's a learning laboratory that is probably as threatened by climate change as any place in the world. From these incredible arc storm winters that we're likely to experience, and we were really lucky in this one that most of it is still stored up in the Sierra Nevada. To then, thinking of these multi-year droughts and what that means for fish and wildlife in the Delta, what it means for people that live in the Delta, and what it means for those that rely on the state and federal projects for exports from the Delta. And so we all have to get a lot more focused in having independent, reliable science to look at. And again, I think the best indicator is to track water quality. And as a citizen, I would say support more science here, support more science related to climate change. We need to understand this accelerating pace of climate change-induced events and storms and drought, and what they mean for how we live on the land as people. And how we live on the land with some compatibility to the world around us. And I think just being at this is really the eye of the storm of, how do we deal with climate change and how do we accommodate those complex myriad of often competing values, interests, and issues, and blend it together to get around the corner to something that we would call sustainable water management. And so I think that in the long run, that means more water conservation. It means more use on locally developed water supply, recycled water, stormwater capture throughout California. Thinking kind of beyond the immediate horizon of this incredible wet winter and what it brought to us, but really that we need to be planning for drought, and we need to be as economical or as conservative about our use of water as we can be, and protect all of these economic, environmental, and just values of nature around us, and that's going to be a continuing challenge.
All right, let me ask you one more question. If we fail to meet the challenge of climate change and fail to meet the challenge of water quality and all that in the Delta, what do we lose? Like, what's at stake here?
Well, I would argue what's at stake here is I think we like to brag in California that we're leaning in to address the challenges of climate change and providing an example for the world to follow. If we fail here, then our failure becomes a pretty strong indicator of an inability to address these challenges, not just here in California, but everywhere else in the world. So I think the world, I would say the world is watching us here. That if we fail to meet these challenges of balancing the needs for nature, the needs for people south of the Delta, and the needs for people in the Delta, we will fail in a way that sends a despairing message to all Californians and those well beyond. So I think this is a critical testing ground in whether we can really protect this unique natural system across 700,000 acres of California. Let's call it the water hub of California. And all the nature that depends on that, and the 75% of Californians that live to the south of us, and recognize this is a very complex place. I mean, we have 700 miles of waterways across the 5-county area of that we call the Delta, and so that's trip down to Los Angeles and back, basically, in this one area across 5 counties in this region. And so to put it in scale, if we fail to do this here, everyone in California deserves to ask, well, where are we going to succeed in achieving sustainable water management for this state? And I think fundamentally that's the question that is really in front of all of us today. So putting this in perspective, the Delta Reform Act that passed in 2009 really set out 2 goals of providing a reliable water supply for all Californians that depend on the Delta, so that both those locally as well as the state and federal contractors to the south, and also for nature. And so if we are going to achieve the dual goals of the Delta Reform Act, we're going to need much more robust science to gain the confidence of all Californians, whether you live south of the Delta, in the Delta, or north of the Delta. The best indicator of really whether we're achieving a sustainable Delta will be to closely watch water quality throughout the Delta. And I think the only way to get there with the full confidence of all Californians is to have a much more robust monitoring program for water quality throughout the Delta, to have a much more transparent single place to go, one Delta, one science program. And as the Delta Watermaster, that's what I'm really most interested in doing. I think we have to have much more accessible science for all Californians to really understand the values that are all intersecting in the Delta. And whether you care about water quality and nature in the Delta, whether you care about water supply south of the Delta, whether you care about the unique wildlife, this is really the linchpin of the Pacific Flyway in California, in addition to being the critical intersection for salmon in the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. And so from whatever angle you care about, we need a much deeper investment in independent science to really provide one platform for all Californians to better understand what's happening in the Delta. And so really, as the Delta Watermaster, I think that's what I am most excited about. I think we need to have a much deeper level in a singular independent science program that frankly makes this amazing place that we call the Delta more accessible to all Californians. Well, I'm not really. I am, for my purposes, I'm really counting probably the last down to the Kings River in the San Joaquin Valley, and so it's really all the snow melt off both the southern Sierra, everything south of Tahoe, and everything north of Tahoe, and this year had 400% average of just a record-breaking snowfall year south of Lake Tahoe, and that is the challenges of that are really going to continue with us till the month of August, maybe even the end of August. In just that we will likely lose control of reservoirs along the way, and we will test the capacity of the levees on the San Joaquin River for the rest of the summer. And so that's really an unprecedented condition, and it really represents some unique challenges.